testing, testing. Is it on now? Beautiful. Hey guys, great to see you. Thanks for having me with you tonight. Hey, I'm going to take advantage of just hanging with you guys for a second, just to express some appreciation that I know is in each of your hearts, but it's in my heart as a pastor and as a guy who used to do youth ministry, that, creating a community for young people to be a part of and to travel through this phase of your life together with is no small task. And we're coming up on a year of having Harrison and Kelsey with us, and boy, what a fast year that's been, but what an effective, impacting year it has been. And looking back on just what you guys have built, the joy that you've brought, the fun that you've brought, the interest you brought, the connection with each other that you've brought, the insights you brought, but the hunger for God, because I've been around youth ministries before where there's just activity, but there's not necessarily a God-centeredness in it. So more than anything, we're grateful for that. But can I just take a moment to say thank you guys so much for how you have blessed us and what you've brought to our lives. Totally grateful and excited for all that God has for us in the future. All right, so I get to be part of this series that you guys are doing, Faith Under Fire. Let me just say two things before I kind of jump into the subject tonight. Hey, your faith is a big deal. The Bible talks about a connection with God that comes by faith. So God is this reality that you can't reach out and touch, and if you're going to connect with God, you're going to do it by faith. And so salvation is about being right with God. It's about eternal life. It's about things that matter way beyond just the teenage years of life. It's about eternal things. But, you can't be saved without faith. And when God does a work in your life, it's a work of faith that's in you that's going to travel with you through the years. So that means the world and sin and the devil is going to always come after your faith. Right? Remember, Jesus said this to the Apostle Peter. Jesus knew that tough times were coming. He was going away, and he had walked with his disciples all these years. But he turned to Peter and he said, Peter, Satan has desired to sift you like wheat. He's coming after you. But then he said this, but I have prayed for you that your faith would not fail. Well, that's a big insight from Jesus, that when the enemy comes, when the forces of the world try to interrupt whatever God has for you in this life, what they want to go after is your faith. And so there's a need for you to protect your faith, and I appreciate the series that you guys have been walking through, where you've looked at several things that go to war with your faith. And so tonight, my assignment was to look at the issue of science in our world today, technology and smart thinker type people. And let me just say this before I jump into, because I'm going to beat up on science a little bit tonight, because I don't think most of us get an accurate engagement with science. If you get around scientists, they're biased, like any of us. They're going to be a little bit biased in the category they live in. But I'm not anti-science. How many of you guys know what you want to do when you graduate high school? How many of you guys know what you want to do? Like, you want to get a degree in college in something. You guys know what that is? Cool. Okay, somebody shout at me. What do you want to do? Everybody raise their hand. Just shout at me. Wow. Okay. Marine biology. Why, you guys aren't boring. Who? Did you just say an electro-property lawyer? Intellectual property. You said that was smarter than me to even understand. Does anybody just want to be a fireman or something? Or maybe play basketball? Anybody else? All right, how many of you guys know that when you go to college, you're going to have two separations of people in the university? Some are going to be trying to get a Bachelor of Arts, and somebody is going to be trying to get a Bachelor of Science, right? And a lot of you guys sound like you're going to be Bachelor of Science people. So science, I'm not wanting to beat up on science. Okay, I'm a pastor, and I've been a pastor for 30-something years now. But before that, I have a science background, so I have an engineering background. So anybody want to be an engineer? No engineers in the room? Wow, what's wrong with you people? All right, so I was an engineer before I was a pastor, and I like science, and I actually want to steal science back from the world, and I want to give it back to God, because science belongs to God. When you read the Bible, and we're going to do that when we get to the end, we're going to see how science belongs to God. But let me start with this question I put in your outline. So isn't science about sure, proven, tested facts, while religion is about personal, unreasonable faith? Right? Isn't that an accurate description? Right? The guys who do science, there's got a lot of formulas, there's a lot of math, there's a lot of data, there's a lot of analysis, there's lab experiments, there's all kinds of reports that you have to write. You got to follow a bunch of rules, you discover all kinds of laws, you use computers, you just interact with a lot of stuff that doesn't make mistakes. There's a lot of absolutes in technology, a lot of absolutes in science. So the impression is when people with science backgrounds interact with your life and they speak about the world that we live in, they kind of get a pedestal to stand on because they're really smart and they know what they're talking about and they're totally objective. All right, let's see if we can do two things tonight. One, make sure when we walk out of this room we remember this. Science is only human. There's no non-humans thinking their way through this. Science is only human. And second, there's more to your life than science. All right, so those are two things I want to go after tonight. First, remember this. Science is still human beings using human intellect and human data gathering to try and understand complex and infinite things. Which immediately means science is very limited because it uses the same brain all of us got in our heads. Does anybody think that anybody, including yourself, knows everything? Right? So there's a limit between my ears that I only know so much. I can only gather so much data. I'm trying to figure out and explain something to you, but I can only reach and grab so much data. And how much data is out there? How much information is out there? How much is there to know out there? So immediately, science is very limited, but it's going to make statements, and it's going to publish big books, and we're going to have them as textbooks in college, but it's limited, right? All right, so let me give you this. I'm going to give you a couple of quotes from the science world when we start out here. This is an article by Sarah Scholes. She wrote, "Here's why we might live in a multiverse." It's from Scientific American. How many of you guys have heard of the multiverse? Come on. You old people, you've never heard of the multiverse? Lemoyne, what do you live in a hole? You're about the next oldest to me, I think, in the room here. No, that's not true. I didn't see Patrice over there. All right, how many of you guys you've heard of the multiverse? Yeah. All right. All right, let's trace a little background on the multiverse here. All right, listen to this thought. One problem with those other universes is that if they exist, which, by the way, when all of us who grew up here are a little bit older than you guys, there was no such thing as a multiverse. No one taught multiverses. No one even introduced multiverses, and movies weren't even made about multiverses back then. But all of a sudden, there's something out there about a multiverse. So if they exist, this article says, they're beyond our perception. So did you catch that? If I'm a scientist right now, I'm telling you that there's something that exists, but we can't perceive it. All right, well, that doesn't sound like science, but okay. Scientists don't currently have a way to directly test the idea of the multiverse. But what does it mean that the multiverse is currently untestable? There are other ideas in physics now that can never be tested directly. Physics, science, is coming right out and saying we can't directly test some things. For example, the universe is expanding and accelerating, which means it's moving faster and faster as it expands. And light has a finite speed, even though light moves really quick. But if something's accelerating, it's eventually going to be moving too fast for light. So we're never going to be able to see parts of the universe that are beyond a certain radius. It could be that nature has surprises beyond the range of observability, and we would never know. All right, this is science coming right out and acknowledging there's certain information we can't even reach it. We don't even know how to tap into it. So we don't know what we would find if we could even touch that stuff. So listen, there is a segment of scientists who would say, well, we need to accept that there will be things that we will never know. And there are others who stubbornly might pursue other possibilities. Some researchers say that if something is untestable in traditional ways, it's not science. It's pseudoscience. To you, is the goal of science to try to find the truth of the universe, or simply to find things that can be proved through experimentation? Right? We're in a church, and you're living your life, and there's something called faith involved in your life. And you base that faith on something. It's not no information. You base it on something. And science comes along and meets all you church people and acts like what you do is weird. You're believing something without having all the information. You believe in something that you can't even perceive. But the honest analysis of science is, so does science. Science does exactly that. She finishes up saying, we're a very bold group, these scientists, of people living on a planet that's a relatively tiny part of everything. We use our instruments to try to understand it as much as we can. We use different tools, and one of those tools is theoretical physics. Then that sounds big. That's a big $20 word, right? Theoretical physics. Do you know what that word means? We guess. That's what a lot of science does. And so you guys who have taken some science classes, you followed, there's models of how you stand up information in science. There's a hypothesis, which is, well, maybe it's this way. It's a guess. And that's what theoretical physics is. It's somebody with a lot of letters behind their name writing big, thick textbooks, but they're explaining something to you, but it's really a guess in a lot of categories, not in all categories. All right, before I read this next quote to you guys, how many of you guys could tell me any famous physicists? Can you name one famous physicist? Albert Einstein, excellent. Anybody else? Stephen Hawking, who said that? All right, so after that, your list is going to get really, really hard. So Albert Einstein, and why does physics matter? Because physics is the science that explores the physical universe, the thing that we live in, the thing that you and I interact with on a regular basis. All right, so probably more than Einstein, though he's world famous and hard to rival, Stephen Hawking wrote a book on physics, a little bit on physics, that was a New York Times bestseller. It was amazing that anybody would buy that much stuff that was about physics. But listen to what Mr. Hawking said. He said, we are each free to believe what we want. And it's my view that the simplest explanation is there is no God. All right, this is a very smart guy. He's published all kinds, he's spoken at universities all over the world. He's invited to these massive conferences where there's thousands of people there. And he's saying, it's my opinion, there is no God. No one created the universe, and no one directs our fate. This leads me to a profound realization. There's probably no heaven, and no afterlife either. We have this one life to appreciate the grand design of the universe. And for that, I am extremely grateful. All right, let's do a little life analysis here, because that guy just said something that doesn't make any sense. You don't believe that there's a God. Where did all this stuff come from? Well, he's going to have some kind of an explanation. It's going to have a little bit of a bang involved in it. You guys have heard a little bit about it. But I just want to pick on one thing he says. We have one life to appreciate the grand design. Did you just say grand design? Did you just say the universe is designed? It didn't just accidentally appear, a series of weird events, one after another, that everything that we know of just randomly suddenly started. There was no design. No, you said there was a design. The guy who says there's no God says there is a design. Why is that? Because the dude is smart enough to recognize this world screams design. All this stuff could not, it's too complicated. It could not have happened by accident. And then he comes along and he says this, I'm extremely grateful. Wait, you're extremely grateful for no afterlife? You're extremely grateful for a world in which there's no heaven, there's no personal element. This is just a universe that you live for a very brief time. Your whole life is truly meaningless because no matter, which by the way, he's dead now a few years ago, doesn't matter anything that he did with his life, but you're grateful for that? All right, not to be confused, because Stephen Hawking said this a few years before that. He said the human race is just a chemical scum on a moderate-sized planet orbiting around a very average star in the outer suburb of one among 100 billion galaxies. We are so insignificant that I can't believe the whole universe exists for our benefit. That would be like saying that you would disappear if I closed my eyes. Wait, you're grateful for that? You're grateful to be chemical scum on a moderate-sized planet just floating around? Nothing matters. There's no meaning in any of this, but you're grateful for that? I don't think you really are grateful for that. I think that's science speak for I'd like you to buy my book, full of my ideas, full of my hypothesis, full of my sell you a possibility, a guess. I've formulated a really cool sounding guess, and I'm here to present it to you. So don't think for a second that guys who are doing science, they're wearing white lab coats, they're totally objective. Everything they're saying is not moved by some personal bias in their life, like a preacher does. Oh, no. A scientist is up here to convince you as much as a preacher's up here to convince you. And he's convinced of something, even though he hasn't seen everything, and even though he would tell you, I can't even test the universe as to whether or not what I'm saying is true. But he's going to put it in a book, and he's going to try and convince you. So nobody go to a science class and think science is totally objective. It deals with facts, well-tested and proven facts. That's not the case. All right, so question. I'll give you a good example here. In the last century, and your life is being affected by this. Science, it has labs, and it's got data, and it's got formulas and math equations. Does science ever get it wrong? Well, the answer is obviously yes. But here's the thought. Encyclopedia Britannica says, like Thomson's discovery of the electron, right? So you guys, hopefully you paid attention a little bit. You know a little bit about the nucleus and electrons and protons and all that stuff. Like Thomson's discovery of the electron, the discovery of radioactivity in uranium by a French physicist, Henri Becquerel, in 1896, listen, it forced scientists to radically change their ideas about atomic structure. All right, so all these years you're moving along, you're convinced that you can explain the atom, you write books, you publish them, you teach at universities, you share your ideas, and somebody reaches into something in the universe and pulls something out and goes, ooh, this is new, this is different, we've never seen this before, and since this is now true, that isn't true anymore. You know what we've been telling you was true all these years? What we published books about, and you came to university and you got a degree and we explained all that to you, it's not true anymore, right? Radioactivity demonstrated that the atom was neither indivisible nor immutable, which is what they thought before, this tiny particle. Instead of serving merely as an inert matrix for electrons, the atom could change form and emit an enormous amount of energy. Furthermore, radioactivity itself became an important tool for revealing the interior of the atom. Can you imagine if you showed up, Wild West, mid-1800s, and people got guns and they're shooting some stuff and they got sticks of dynamite. If you watch a cowboy movie, there's always a stick of dynamite somewhere, right? Do you think you could convince anybody about nuclear explosions? Nobody had discovered radioactivity yet. So if you told somebody, I tell you what, fill the Superdome up with dynamite sticks, and I'm going to split a tiny little thing that you can't even see. And when I split that, its explosion will be so much bigger than that explosion. You couldn't convince anybody of that. Nobody would believe that because they didn't have any information at that point to be able to believe it. But what was learned about the fact that this little tiny particle that nobody could see that had a nucleus to it, right? Nucleus is where we get the word nuclear from. That nucleus gives off energy. It sheds energy out of this nucleus. And so what a massive development in science this was, because we developed all kinds of things. Nuclear power comes from that discovery. Nuclear medicine that's helping people in their bodies comes from that discovery. And nuclear weapons come from that discovery. Massive power and destruction. Well, if that nucleus gives off a certain amount of stuff and it starts to change over time, it'll be different from here to here and from here to here and from here to here. So they discovered something. Hey, well, you could see how much this thing has decayed, how much it's given off over time, and you could measure massive amounts of time now. This is where we get radiocarbon dating from that principle. But here's what science would have said right up until around 1896, before anybody had discovered this tiny little piece of thing. In the 1700s, French naturalist Georges-Louis Leclerc estimated an Earth age of about 75,000 years, while acknowledging it might be much older. 75,000 years. So you have science telling you this is how old the Earth is. Pretty sure, could be a little older. And then you make one discovery about radioactivity and you come back and you change your number. Not just a little. You change your number to 4.5 billion years. That's how old the Earth is. The Earth, according to science now, is 4.5 billion years old. Wait, you just said it was 75,000 years old. Can I just point out, that's not even close. You're not going like from 75,000 to 150,000. You were off by 100%. No, you're like 4.5 billion. I can't even do the math. You are so far off, but you were just telling us, and you were really sure. And now you're telling us something totally different. Welcome to science class. Right? This is just recorded science. Nobody's making this stuff up, but it does teach us something about science, doesn't it? The encyclopedia.com says this: some scientists doubted the Curies. This was a couple who actually was discovering this radioactivity and the fact that these nucleus were giving off energy, and even questioned the existence of radioactivity. They doubted and they questioned. Well, why would somebody in the science world doubt things and question things? Because there's a lot of faith in science. A lot of faith in science. You take your limited brain with its limited ability to know information, you do a limited study on the existence of everything out there, and you draw a conclusion by faith. Because maybe your brain can't process what it needs to process to really figure out what you're looking for. And maybe you can't gather the data. Maybe you haven't developed a tool, an instrument, a microscope that can see that little or that big or that far away. And you just got told by some other scientists that the expanding universe means you're never going to be able to find parts of it. What if there's a God sitting in a lounge chair in the edge of the universe? And we don't have the instrument to figure out he's there. Now, that's pretty stupid sounding because the Bible sounds nothing like that. But the Bible is going to give you some information about another realm that exists. And I'm not talking about the quantum realm here, right? Everybody who's seen Marvel movies, Marvel loves this information. It is building, it's a universe, and it's building the multiverse out of this quantum idea. But let me just go back 100 years from today. Nobody was talking about quantum universes and multiverses. 100 years ago, Albert Einstein, the smartest guy who apparently ever lived, was just figuring out the theory of relativity, which became the cornerstone of physics, right? So he figures that out about 100 years ago. But listen to this thought from an article titled, How Einstein Questioned Quantum Physics and Lost. Because physics is going to change. It's going to go from the theory of relativity physics, to quantum physics. Listen to this. Quantum mechanics is, listen, notoriously weird, even though it ranks as the most accurate and powerful scientific theory ever developed. It is a platform that has launched 1,000 puzzles, paradoxes, and conundrums. All right, just stop for a second and gather all those words together. You've got something that is totally weird, notoriously weird. It generates puzzles, paradoxes, and conundrums, which sounds like a whole lot of confusion and a whole lot of competing ideas and facts that pull on each other. That's all here. And yet, it is the most accurate and powerful scientific theory ever displayed. If religion ever answers a question with, I don't know, I can't answer that. Well, if there's a God, how do you explain this? And how do you explain that? And how do you explain this thing happening? And if God is God, where did he come from? And when you return that question with, I don't know, does that make you feel like your faith is invalid? Does that make you feel like, hey, if I don't have answers to every question that any human being can ask me, I don't have a valid faith? Well, can I just tell you, quantum physics can't answer itself. It says things as a hypothesis, but when you ask it questions, it says, I don't know, over and over again. And yet that's not stopping scientists from teaching it, from presenting it as though it's fact and it's real. Listen to this. Quantum physics seems to tell us that events can occur without cause. Something just happens. Nothing leads up to it. There's no cause, no explanation. That objects can be in two places at the same time. That observing the universe may irrevocably disturb it. You remember that scene in The Avengers? When the weird little wise lady with the bald head, she's trying to explain to the Hulk that little timeline thing, if you pull something out of the timeline, you'll create this fork in the road and, two different realities will come. This is where all that comes from, by the way. It's quantum physics. And that systems with elements at the same time, wait a minute. And that systems with elements located across the galaxy can act as an instantaneous whole. Given all these affronts of both common sense and classical physics, right? So science turns around and says, hey, we've had all this science for years. We've taught it to you in published textbooks. But now we've got a new idea comes along and it affronts these old ideas. And it's uncommon. You'd be forgiven if you figured there must be something wrong with quantum physics. Albert Einstein certainly did. The story of his intuition about the deficits of quantum theory is worth recounting if we want to understand where that theory stands today. So the smartest guy in the world hears somebody interact with a new idea and he says, that ain't right. And he never did fully get convinced of some things about quantum physics. Stephen Hawking, who would be the modern version of Albert Einstein, early in his own physics career, he didn't believe in multiverses and much of quantum physics, but eventually he became convinced, hey, maybe that's true. So science treats faith in a creator like it's an impossibility and unintelligent. And yet it shifts its positions over time. This is just the last 100 years. What will science teach 100 years from now? What will be the explanations for our existence then? So let me just give you one more thought. We're going to move to the Bible from our science moment here. science has faith in it. Right? Faith is a human quality, and it's a God-given human quality that gives us the ability to believe something without fully knowing everything about it, which is a good thing because none of us are smart enough to know everything. Only God is infinite and can know everything. So all of us do life with a limited amount of information, which means we do life with a lot of faith. And science has a lot of faith in it. Right? There's a guy named Michael Denton. He wrote a book called The Miracle of Man. And the reason why he wrote it was because he stares in, I'm not even sure he's a believer, but he stares into the complexity of the human being. And he says it's a miracle that human beings are what they are. There's no way that random chance just put all this together. So Denton wrote that the claim that time and chance are responsible for such sublime complexity is one of the most daring claims in all of science. But it's also one of the least substantiated. No one has ever produced any proof that the designs in nature are within the reach of chance. So this is what science does. Science throws out a possibility, a guess at something that could exist, and then it introduces two things that no one can argue with. Well, what if you added a lot of time and then just chance? Do you think this could be true if you did that? I make a statement that doesn't have support, and it makes you doubt, but I'm going to throw in two words. Well, what if a lot of time passed? What if 4.5 billion years passed? Oh my gosh, anything could happen in 4.5 billion years, right? And then there's chance. I mean, come on, you can't rule out that something could just happen for reasons that nobody can explain. Is that true? Right? I mean, a lot of time, and who knows what could happen. Well, okay, yeah, I guess that's kind of true. All right, welcome to the land of faith. There's no science in that. You understand? There's no science in the statement that suddenly there was a big bang and everything came from where? Well, it came from nothing, Keith. Well, what makes you say that? Science? Science has never, there's no formula, there's no lab experiment, there's no reference point for something coming from absolutely nothing. That's not science. The idea that you could believe the universe has never testified that something just always happens every other day. It's a Wednesday event. Something just suddenly appears. Let's just sit here. Until, I hope you brought a lunch. We're going to sit here and we're just going to wait for something to appear right here in the front of the room. Just out of nowhere. That's crazy, right? But that's what science is asking you to believe. Now, that's very different than believing that there's a God who is involved in creating everything. Now, that's got some mystery to it as well, and that's got some things that you can't explain because there's a God involved now, and he has force to do things that maybe you can't fully explain. But science can't fully explain itself either, so please don't insult yourselves by thinking, well, the scientists are the clear thinkers. The dudes with all the equations and the lab coats and write long books that nobody wants to read, those guys have got it right. No, God's the only one who was ever there. He's the one who's got it right. All right, so first thing, science is just human. Second, there's more to life than science. And your lives scream that. So when you go to college, as a matter of fact, if you went to colleges 100 years ago, 200 years ago, if you went around the world to any college, I want to say this absolutely because I don't know everything, but I would almost say absolutely, you will not find a college that the only department in that college of study is science. We're going to educate you, and the only thing we're going to tell you about is science. But that's not what people want to know, right? There's a Bachelor of Arts, there's a Bachelor of Science, there's all kinds of aspects of science. There's history. People study history when they go to college. Why do people study history? Why are there social studies? Because as a human being, you're not just interested. There's something inside of you that's interested in more than just molecules and explanations and facts of technical origins. There's something in you that wants to know, why do I do what I do? Why does anybody do what they do? Why are people the way they are? Why is life the way it is? And so we pick up history books and we study the people who have come before us to be, hey, what did they do? How did they handle life? And what were they after? And what motivated them? And then there's philosophy. Philosophy used to be much bigger than science, actually. Philosophy gives birth to a lot of science. When you go back to the Greek culture, philosophy was people thinking about life. But it was thought processes and what people believed that they were interacting with. And then there's a whole world of art. When you go back and you visit, you travel around the world, you're not just wanting to go see, hey, how are the molecules different in Spain than they are in Florida? It's like you want to see the architecture. You want to see sculpture and paintings. You want to read about the history of what took place in certain locations there. You want to listen to the music that's there. And art captures our attention, right? So I was watching the news the other night, and this promotion came on, and it's a perfect promotion of this. It's a story that Kevin Costner is going to be narrating or being kind of the main dude who leads us through this. But the History Channel is putting on this thing called The West, and they want you to watch it. All right, I'm going to play the commercial. I just want you to pay attention to what they're appealing to in you. There's no talk about radioactivity, the age of the universe. There's no rock formation involved, and how old is that, blah, 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 blah. Listen to what they're going to reach into you to get you to watch this.
What do we see when we think of the West?
American West conjures one.
You can sell this $5 spatula on Amazon and compete with hundreds of other spatula sellers, or you can sell digital.
What do we see when we think of the West?
American West conjures wonder, possibility, opportunity.
The West is a place where anything is possible. It is the essence of the American dream.
But many people have to pay the price of ambition and westward expansion.
And everyone is willing to fight and to die for it.
From sea to shining sea.
American forces have a sense of superiority. The Native Americans are going to prove them deadly wrong.
California's reputation for banditry is a big problem.
The governor creates the Rangers.
Their principal tools are violence and murder.
If America is moving west, there's a seam that opens up between the free states and the slave states. It's a defining moment in the history of America.
These stories will captivate us and shock us. Now it's time to come face to face with the real story of our wild past.
Kevin Costner's The West. New series premieres Memorial Day at 9.
I love that he says this. These stories will captivate us. And listen to the words that were used in this. Wonder, and they printed them up on the screen there a couple of times really fast. Opportunity, possibility, the American dream, paying the price, ambition, willing to fight and to die for something, violence and murder, hope, despair, beauty. Can I just tell you, that's not in the science department wherever you're going to college, right? And quite honestly, you're not all that interested in the science department. Probably none of you have a Stephen Hawking book underneath your bed at home. You probably don't have a poster of Albert Einstein on your wall. Maybe some people do. That was kind of weird. But I bet you might go to a Taylor Swift concert, right? Taylor Swift just did a tour that attracted all kinds of curious people. Over 10 million people came to watch Taylor Swift last year in the Eras Tour, right? That created $2 billion. $2 billion. Do you understand how much $2 billion is? A person put on a concert, and people spent $2 billion to listen to her sing. Do you know that's more than the gross domestic product of over 200 countries in the whole world? So there's something about whatever Taylor Swift is engaging in doing that appeals to people. It captivates people. The average ticket was $204. The average book by one of these physicists, maybe 20. But people spend $200 because there's something in a Taylor Swift song that appeals to you more than a molecular structure diagram. Because there's more to life than science. There's more to your life than just scientific information, right? Can I mess with some Taylor Swift songs? Anybody a Taylor Swift fan? I'm guessing some of y'all might be. Listen, this is her lyrics. Please, this is her song Prophecy from an album called Midnights. Please, I've been on my knees. Change the prophecy. Don't want money. Just someone who wants my company. Let it once be me. Who do I have to speak to about if they redo the prophecy? Right? What is this song about? Rock formations? Molecular structures? Right? This is a big popular song. Lots of people, you probably know this song, right? This is about longing to belong. This is about the value of companionship. This is what it means to be human. She sings another song called Nothing New. How can a person know everything at 18 but nothing at 22? And this is from a website that actually, I'm going to repeat to you, this is a website that interprets her songs. Right? They say here, Taylor compares the confidence she felt when she was 18 to the uncertainties of being 22. This lyric perfectly conveys how it feels to get older and long for the uncomplicated days of the past. Hey, you hear a song that's about that, you get that, right? You guys are in that window. You're about to exit something really familiar to you and venture into the unknown, and there's going to be all kinds of this lack of confidence, fear, insecurity is going to come flooding in. You're going to listen to that song and go, I get that. Yep, I get that song. That's why I'm listening. Here's a song called Coney Island. She says, place to be, the mischief, the gift-wrapped suburban dreams. Sorry for not winning you an arcade ring. And this interpretation is Coney Island is filled with an unforgettable moments, including the nostalgic lyric that describes a love akin to a suburban dream. She parallels their romance to the age before the internet. So there's romance in this song. There's dreams, there's nostalgia, there's looking back with warm affections, right? This is what it means to be human. She's got a song called New Year's Day. Please don't ever become a stranger whose laugh I could recognize anymore. All right, this is her New Year's Day pulls on our heartstrings. Anybody able to find heartstrings with a medical device? Just curious. Can you find your heartstrings? Can science find your heartstrings? Because they get pulled on by things, apparently. They must be in there, hanging out inside of us. Anybody know what it is to have your heartstrings pulled on? Anybody in the room? All right. Have you ever had your heart broken? Ever become really troubled? Ever fall in love with something, someone, and your emotions suddenly pull on you in a strange way? Can I just tell you, there's no scientific device that can point out to you what the heck is going on inside of me. No x-ray, no MRI is going to show you your heartstrings, but you know what they are. It describes the thought of losing someone you love and the fear of being reminded of them without getting to be with them. Right? Why so many people are interested in a Taylor Swift song? Because life is more than science, and quite honestly, it's much more than science. And all that she writes songs about and identifies with and puts to some kind of a mood, and that music, by the way, it appeals to you, it reaches into you a certain way because music is meant to affect us a certain way. Scientifically, it's hard to prove all that. But you know it's real. And the reality of your life is I could write the most influential math and science formula on the board, and no one's leaving this room going, I'm complete. That was the most awesome message Pastor Keith has ever given in his life. E equals MC squared. Oh my gosh, I'm changed forever. It's like, no, it's not going to happen. But that's true. E equals MC squared. You guys who are nerds know exactly what I'm talking about. So, why is science not the ultimate big deal? Not just to you guys, but really to any of us. It is facts, it is information, and it can mess with your faith. But it's not the ultimate big deal. Here, remember this. I think I wrote this, put it in your outline. Remember this. Science discusses matter, but you need history and philosophy, art and religion to discuss the things that matter. Your life is more than science. So when somebody comes along and says, well, wait a minute, how old is the earth according to the Bible? Well, that's a debate. We can go into that in a whole different place. But scientific information that moves and shifts every 100 years, that you put your faith in temporarily until it becomes something else, and it tries to explain your existence, and then it morphs and turns into another explanation later, that's a massive moment of faith. But let me take you to this place. I brought this book with me. If anyone just want to read, like to read intimidating books. This is a book called The Signature in the Cell. This is from an Oxford scientist, DNA and the Evidence for Intelligent Design. And this is a book trying to explain to you, do you know how complicated that little cellular DNA thing is inside of every one of your cells? Do you have any idea how complicated that is? Well, it takes a little while to explain it. To believe that the complexity of our existence sprang up out of nowhere by chance, that no one can explain. An explosion happened. And the explosion didn't just light something up that went away. I don't know, when I blow stuff up, it dies down. You know, it's not like, when I was your age, I was blowing up everything. And it's not as though I can say, you know what, the entire city of New Orleans is gone because I started by blowing something up, and it just kept blowing up and blowing up and blowing up and blowing up. No, it blew up and it went away. So why didn't the Big Bang do that? Why didn't it just blow up and go away? Why did it do something that no one can explain? It started, and no one can explain how that happened, and it took disorder and ordered everything into perfect unity and harmony so that things like you and I could exist in the uniqueness of the way in which we are. Different from everything else in creation, right? You know, I've yet to stumble upon, I got squirrels all over my backyard. They're cute and everything, but I've yet to stumble upon like a little group of squirrels sitting around reading books together. And then you go over there and you pick it up and it's like, hey, what y'all reading? And you look at it and it's like, oh my gosh, the history of squirrels. I had no idea that squirrels did that 200 years ago. Look at that, 1,000 years ago, squirrels. What is it that squirrels aren't curious about their past? That they don't write anything down, that they're not enamored with where did we come from? Why am I here? What's the purpose for my life? They're not doing that. Neither is your dogs, neither is anything else in creation, but we are. There's something weird and unique about us because we were created differently than everything else. All right, so let's just visit the Creator just for a second. I'll try and do this quick. All right, so when you open your Bible up and you try to get an explanation for where did everything come from, you go to Genesis 1 and you listen to the only eyewitness that exists. Science is not an eyewitness, and it's guessing at how everything got started. Here's the only eyewitness. God's the only eyewitness of how things got started. Genesis chapter 1, if you guys can turn there, you got a Bible? Genesis 1 verse 1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. And then verse 5 says, God called the light day, and darkness he called night, and there was evening, and there was morning the first day. So in 5 verses, you've come in touch with all kinds of things. Some of those things science can interact with and some it cannot. I don't know what science does with whatever is described here as being void, formless and void. I don't know what science does if it wants to go back to the original scene and test for God and the Spirit of God hovering over things. Science can't find God. And suddenly light appears. And if you go back and you read much about science, science is not sure It believes in time. I know that's kind of weird. But the Bible describes time. God created time. And then if you guys know this story, right? You keep following what's here in Genesis chapter 1. God's going to begin to create everything that exists and put it before us. God called the expanse heaven. There was evening, there was morning on verse 8, the second day. And God let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place. And let the dry land appear, and it was so. God called the dry land earth. And the waters that were gathered together, he called the seas, and God saw that it was good. And God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, and here comes plants. And then the next day, God's going to create animals. All right, so here's the birth of science. Right? God, you want geology? You want to study rocks? Here's your beginning of studying rocks. Here's the God who created rocks. Every characteristic that is in rocks, God put there. You want to study biology? You want to study zoology? You want to study botany? It's all in God's creation. But this is radically important for your life. When you read the story of creation, there's two dimensions, if I can call it that, two realms that are in creation. There's a material realm and an immaterial realm. There's stuff you can touch and do lab experiments on, and there's stuff you can't touch. And God says he created it all. So you know this, if you keep reading, and I'll just try to do this quickly for you guys. You keep reading in this story, there's something called God in here. What kind of a scientific experiment do you do to discover whether God is present? And because science can't perceive that God is present, does that mean God's not real? Because we just learned that there are things that physics believes that it can't perceive, but it believes it anyway. So you could be a good scientist and still believe that there's a God that I just can't figure out how to get my hands on him, but he still exists. And then God's going to create man. Do you remember the story of God creating man? Do you remember the ingredients of man? This is very important. One day, God creates man, and it says he created man out of the dust, the dirt of the ground. So there's a piece of humanity that you can do all kinds of scientific stuff with because it's made out of dirt. It's physical. It's testable. You can drain some fluids out of it. You can do an x-ray on it. It's stuff you can touch. Science can interact with the dirt. But then it says God breathed into Adam a breath of life, and man became a living creature. All right, well, now you have another realm of your existence and my existence that's not touchable, and science can't prove that it exists, but it does. And you know it does. And science knows it does. You know, let somebody drop dead. Not be lying on the floor in pain or asleep. Let them drop dead. They're no longer a person, they're a corpse. And they're going to get treated differently. They're not going to get rushed to the hospital, they're dead. They're going to be taken to a morgue. And eventually, how respectful is this? We're going to put dirt all over them and bury them in the ground. Would you do that to a person? No. But you do that to this because it's no longer a person. Because what made a person a person? Dirt plus breath. You needed to be animated. You needed an invisible form of life to bring you to life. So human beings aren't just dirt. They are breath. They're immaterial. And what's inside that human soul? All the stuff that Kevin Costner appealed to. That's what's in your soul. Those ingredients are what's in you. Like things like love in you. Right? Anybody know of a science test that can find love in you? But you do know what love is, right? And that's important to us. How about joy or peace or happiness or a meaningful life or satisfaction or fulfillment or values or dignity? Right? These are the things that are in your soul, and it's why you get up in the morning. It's why you have the friends that you do. It's why you listen to the music that you listen to. It's why you can't wait to do X, Y, or Z or go somewhere. All that stuff is coming out of the invisible piece of you. If you go back to the Garden of Eden, there's this moment where the God of heaven creates earth. So now you have this other place called heaven. Do you know the Bible every once in a while pulls back a little bit of a curtain and lets you see into heaven? Just a little bit. Right? The prophet Isaiah, he got to see in heaven. He got to see a throne, and around the throne were these angelic beings that he had never seen before, and they had wings and multiple eyes, and they flew, and they stood near to God, and they protected the throne. This actually exists, but can I tell you, there's not a Hubble telescope that you can break out and see that thing, because it's invisible to science. But that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. When Satan shows up in the Garden of Eden, he's a heavenly being. He's not an earthly being. He takes the form of an earthly creature. He takes the form of a serpent, but he's not a serpent. He's an angelic being. And you couldn't have walked up to any of the angelic beings and bust out your stethoscope and say, hey, let me listen to your heartbeat. Let me run an MRI on you. Let me do an x-ray to see what exactly are you made of. They're invisible to any of those things. But life is more than the stuff that you can touch. And listen, the one thing I know as a teenager was the stuff that turned me inside out, it wasn't physical. It wasn't the natural stuff in my world. It was the stuff you couldn't touch. It was the feelings and the fears and the thoughts and doing life and whether I belonged or not. It was a little bit more like a Taylor Swift song that really, really mattered, that you felt rejected or left out or unimportant. And next thing you know, you can't eat because your stomach's up in your throat and you're so nervous and you feel horrible. All right, so now it's become physical, but the stuff that drove you to that point, you can't find that with science. All right, one story, and then I'll quit. Am I out of time, dude? I don't do time very well. Out of time? One story. All right, I won't read it to you. Genesis 1, creation. Genesis 2, man is created. Genesis 3, the devil shows up and messes everything up. Genesis 4, okay, guys, let's go live. All right, here's the first story told in Genesis 4. One day, Cain and Abel are out doing life. One of them likes to work in the garden. So there's some science here. He probably would have loved a botany book on how to plant, how to fertilize, how to get your crops to grow, etc. He would have loved science, and God created him for that. God created man to be scientific, to explore creation. And his brother was a keeper of animals. So he liked zoology. So he liked to take care of animals, farm animals, etc., etc. Both of them knew to relate to an invisible God, to a God that was not testable by science. And when they approached this God, one of them brought plants, the other one brought animals. And I'm not going to get into the details of the story of, well, why did that not work for the other guy? But something happens in this story where Cain is trying to feel the acceptance of this invisible God. And he brings an offering that's not accepted. So now he's in touch with, I don't feel accepted. I don't feel important. I don't feel okay about who I am. And science can't touch any of that. But it's powerful. It's so powerful that it's going to eat him up from the inside out. And you know what he's going to do? You know the story. You know what he's going to do? He's going to become so controlled by that and so angry that he's going to kill his brother. And the first murder in the Bible gets recorded. Because of something that science could have helped with? No. Because of something on the inside that really, really matters. Something in your soul. So let me just wrap this up. And Harrison, you can do whatever you want. If you want to do Q&A, you want to just be done. Guys, when you guys go to do life, and you acknowledge to somebody, if you go to university, or maybe in your high schools, and you interact with somebody who pulls the science card out, they're going to introduce it to you as though what they're dealing with is absolutely tested, proven truth. All right, I hope you can leave here tonight and you can recognize, not true. Science is a moving thing. It changes its beliefs, it changes what it said yesterday into something different. It's educated and it's got a lot of formulas and a lot of ideas as to why it does it, but it's capable of having very different positions just 100 years later. So there's a lot of faith in science. But even if you were to say like, I'm this scientific dude, can I just tell you, you're not a scientific dude. Because when you go home at night and you feel horrible and you can't sleep and you're freaked out and you're scared and you feel rejected, unimportant, nobody cares about me, nobody texts me, I'm nothing, that's not science. And no matter what you know scientifically, it's not going to fix you because you're more than a piece of science. You got a soul, and that soul was created by God. And there's certain things that only God can do with your soul. And it's certain things that God wants for you in your life that you got to get from him. And you got to walk with him by faith. So take your faith, that ability to believe things that you don't have 100% knowledge about, which scientists use every day, and put your faith in God. The God who revealed himself as the one, you came from him. He's got a purpose and a plan for your life. And whether you're having a bad day like Cain was, God spoke to Cain. God gave Cain a remedy to what was going on in his soul. He chose not to obey God. And you and I can do that too. But remember, you're more than just something physical, right? There's an invisible part of you as well. Let me pray for you guys. Father, I thank you that we're living our lives and you give an explanation to where we came from. And it's from you, and we're not a bunch of random accidents that just happened to be formed by a bunch of random molecules, and here I am, and eye color and hair, etc. But there's nothing about me except random accident. Lord, that's not true. The Bible says that we are fearfully and wonderfully made, that the design that amazes scientists is there because you're the designer. You created our lives. You know us inside and out. You didn't just make us physical, you made us spiritual. And so, Lord, when we go to do life, we're going to need more than physical stuff. We're going to need you. We're going to need to depend upon you, and we need to have faith in you. So, Lord, thanks for these guys tonight. Thanks for the journey that they're on. Thanks that many of them are going to have an opportunity to go to college. I hope some of them do pursue science, studying the world that you created and figuring out ways to make incredible use of it, because that's what you wanted us to do. You gave us intellect and brains to be able to engage these things and come up with new formulas and come up with new math and understand the world that you made. But Lord, ultimately, what we need to understand is you and who you are to us. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen.
Amen. That just came out of nowhere. Hey, so we're not doing small groups tonight, so Pastor Keith, could you stay just a little bit?
Yeah.
If anybody has any questions or wants to engage in any of the conversations, Pastor Keith's going to be right over there. Feel free to go up to him with any questions or comments, concerns. Maybe you didn't like his analogies or making fun of old people. You can go take it up with him in the corner. Outside of that, hey, couple things. So in the video, I said on Saturday,